Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow. And on today's episode, we are looking again at the Šeško move. How could his impending switch to United hurt their squad building? How can Newcastle pull back their summer from the brink? And then we're diving deep into Serie A. We take a look at Juve's interest in Sandro Tonali, Inter's moves for Lookman and Nkunku, and some underrated teams and transfers to keep an eye on. That's all on today's episode of the Transfer Flow. Okay, so we're back for another Wednesday edition of the podcast. I'm joined by Hayden Van Brewer. How are you doing, Hayden?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you, Patrick?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm glad the previews are out. Thank you to everybody who's signed up. You can still sign up and get access for £10. All 20 Premier League clubs previewed by... I've done a couple. Ted's done some. Obviously, Kim's done a bunch. But also our good friend Neil... Mohammed, who I imagine a lot of you guys follow on Twitter, Catalina Bush. So people should definitely check that out. But today, we're not going to discuss the Premier League too much, except for this headline story. Because the Šeško thing seems like it's now coming to a head. It seems that he's chosen United. Apparently, the full package looks like it's going to be about 90 million euros for this guy. We've talked about this, but like, Hayden, I mean, what do you think of this for all the clubs involved?
Yeah, I think for United fans, the real risk here is that we're doing the Højlund thing again, that you're getting a guy who has upside and potential, a lot of really strong physical traits, is young, and you're hoping they grow into something, but maybe isn't fully the part technically. And again, the concern here from this whole little podcast is like, at the price that you're paying, you're eating into well, maybe there's some real upside and he could be good and really could outperform this too. If this guy doesn't come in and basically perform to his highest ever level all the time, then we're really not getting the value that we paid for. And we're not going to address the rest of the squad that we're counting on Kobe Mainu, Casemiro, these guys to play some real significant minutes in midfield. So I think that continues to be the concern here. In terms of the player itself, like the upside is there. Having Mbeumo, Cunha, Fernandes have a player that can run in behind and provide a box threat with his jumping and size and that kind of thing. I think you can see that side of it. There's some pieces there to like. There's some worry that he's not going to be the technical sort of platform for especially a guy like Cunha and Fernandes who like to come through the middle and link with the striker to do. I think that's the scary bit, is that it feels like United's game plan has a lot of these playmakers central, and Sesko needs to accommodate those guys and help bring them into the game, at least to some extent, in addition to providing a sort of forward option and direct to goal release for them. So yeah, concern is still on the price. In terms of the player and the fit, I think there's still reasons for United to think that he can be a better fit than Højlund and Xerxes in their team. I think we're probably not going to have any issues with that, but the issues are around the price and the usage of resources in the squad, as is maybe kind of commonly the story with Man United when we've talked about them.
Yeah, this is the thing. I think I see a lot of United fans defending this move, but they're defending it on the grounds that they assume United are going to go out and get central midfielders after this. And maybe they can do that. But I'd find it surprising if they did this for nearly 9 figures and then went and got 2 central midfielders. And I think they need 2+ central midfielders. The other worry, of course, as we talked about before, Šeško is low shot volume guy. He has been in the Bundesliga. He also takes on some crazy shots, really. And with him and Bruno and Cunha as well, you got a lot of guys who like to take pot shots from range. But yeah, it's despite being big, he isn't the knock it up to him and he'll hold it up player yet. So I still don't know what the ball progression plan is here. From the Newcastle point of view, there have been rumours that whichever of these two teams didn't get Šeško, they then go for Nick Jackson. Well, if Nick Jackson is available for like 90 mil or something like that, which has been the rumour, though I wouldn't be surprised if the Šeško price pushes that up, Newcastle will be getting the much better player, at least right now, definitely. I mean, I would kind of like that, but on the other hand, Newcastle are in a desperate situation, right? And everybody knows it.
Yeah, Newcastle are in a really challenging spot. I think you guys kind of noted it earlier. They had some staffing changes behind the scenes.
Hmm.
A lot of times when that happens in clubs, there's a real desire to not use too many resources like immediately, like to
Okay.
make sure that when guys come in, if you're hiring good staff and new leadership, you want to make sure that they have as many tools and resources available to start to make decisions with. Obviously, not all budget is freed up and there are ongoing contracts, but to give them the best chance to sort of make an impact if you think that they're really, really good. And so while you're hiring those guys and getting them across the line and getting them in the building, you're sort of kind of on hold. And I think with Newcastle, there was a real need to increase their squad depth, especially at the start of the window with guys that are probably a little bit younger. I think Newcastle are one
Hmm.
of these teams that we've said have, probably a need to get younger, maybe especially in the back line where they've
Yeah.
got Trippier and Dan Burn and some of these guys that they need to be paying attention to that. And if they could have gotten some deals done for sort of 10, 15, 25 million around those sort of perimeter areas, guys that would be rotation pieces, especially as they're playing in Europe, I
Hmm.
think we would have really liked to see a bit more of that business done early so that the decision on what happens with Isak, if he goes, what type of striker are we bringing in? How do we want to enhance that kind of side of the roster on the biggest spend? Because the rest of the team is pretty robust. I think we're pretty happy
Hmm.
with a lot of the rest of the starting lineup. With Gordon and Barnes last season, we saw the depth kind of work there. I think on the right side with Ilanga coming in, we sort of see that same depth. There's plenty of things to like about sort of the starting group and the first couple of subs, but the total depth of the team is sort of the issue that maybe is lacking, and it feels like
Hmm.
Newcastle are caught up right now in deciding what they're going to do with the most expensive position on the field, which is striker, and that's maybe leaving them a little bit light, and that's maybe the worry for us with Newcastle.
Yeah, I mean, like there are rumors they're linked to that we like. Like, I'm quite happy with the Ramsdale thing, and then there's Malik Chow as well, who could come in for what looks like a reasonable fee. But I think it was one of the mics. It was Kaylee or Goodman who made the point on Twitter that what separates a smart club from a less smart club is not do they have a plan going into the window. It's how do they have multiple plans? Like how do they respond to things not going their way? And in this window, things have not gone Newcastle's way, and it feels like they're flailing. Like that is the concern here. I mean, at the same time, I know that Isak is training away, and I guess because they want to, the press in these situations always try to imply that the player can force their way out. But actually, that's not really true. Like, he has a 3-year deal there. At a certain point, do Newcastle not say, Ekitike's gone, we've struck out on Šeško, we're now, maybe we don't like Jackson that much, or maybe we're getting quoted 50 mil for Ollie Watkins or something. Like, at what point do Newcastle say, you know what, we're just going to gamble that we can reintegrate Isak, that he's not going to want to stay on the sidelines and not play for a year, because we've got him signed up until he's 28. So I don't know. If I were Newcastle at a certain stage, I'd be like, brother, you've got a contract, and I don't care what you were told, but like, this is the situation.
Yeah. Again, that's some of the art of management. Some of that's going to be on Eddie Howe, who sort of continued to position himself as the real sort of main decision maker at Newcastle. And then also now they have new staff coming in who are going to have to help manage that situation.
Mm.
Yeah, that's going to be a really big question for Newcastle, and it sort of feels like that situation again is in addition to the rest of the strengthening of the squad that probably needs to happen before a really important campaign. I think for Newcastle, it's really important that they kind of maintain their status in at least sort of the top six here. Like, I think falling out of the top six would be, I don't want to say like a disastrous season, but it would be a pretty major setback in the same way that we sort of saw Nottingham Forest miss out at the very end of the season against Chelsea.
Mm.
I think if Newcastle had that same kind of thing happen, that would be uh, just a really kind of like a punch in the gut, a real setback in a way to their sort of progress and the sort of drive to continually be in Europe that they're looking to do.
Yeah, it's scary for them. I wrote the Newcastle preview, and one of the things I was looking at in that is They played 10 games fewer than Arsenal last year. They played, I think, 14 fewer than Manchester City. So the squad was already not in a good spot. If they start losing key players as well, I mean, look, Botman's going to come back. They think they can get more from Miley, but they've sold Longstaff. So, it's kind of one in, one out here. It feels like there are a bunch of minutes here that they need some people to soak up. And then you look at a club like Brighton, who have endless guys who can take up some minutes. To me, it just makes the disaster case for Newcastle is really quite bad. Whereas even if you're quite optimistic about the best case for them. Should we look at another one of their players who's been linked with a move away? Because today we wanted to focus on Serie A because the Italian football ecosystem is almost hermetic. Like it feels like every now and then you peer into it and you're like, what's going on in this like weird vivarium? And there are a bunch of players who've moved between, like Luca Pellegrini has moved again this summer for like the third or fourth time. He's gone to another big Italian club. And there are these guys who have whole careers just trucking around Serie A that never really get talked about outside. Juve finished fourth last season. They're not really going to tolerate that. They need to try and make an improvement, but they are penned into a corner financially. This summer they've got to make Conceição permanent, but also there's Gonzalez, who they were tied into, Kalulu, who they were tied into. Like they had a load of money tied up in loans to buy. Now they're linked with a move for Sandro Tonali. And at a rumoured price of 55 million, which would be, I think, a loss for Newcastle. What do you think of this? Do you think Juve even have this money? And what do you think of him as a fit for a team like Juventus?
I don't have a good answer on the money question. It feels like that's one where it's like we'd need our Italian correspondent on the ground to be like, how does this work, right? Or get Kieran and the price of football stuff involved here, because there's been a bunch of times this summer where I sort of have those questions like, how does this math work? In terms of Tonali, I think it's like they see a guy that has some of the upside that Coop Miners has. Like I think they see a guy that has sort of the physical ability to do a lot of this kind of stuff, but maybe fits a little bit more of like, he can do a bunch of different jobs for them. Whereas maybe like Tonali is this sort of like all action kind of 8. I think it's where he's been a really great fit for Newcastle, is that like, if they need him to come back and battle and scrap and defend, he can do that. If they need him to press a bit higher and be sort of their more attacking midfielder or playmaker more. I mean, Joelinton is like a very interesting and unique profile in there. But,
yeah.
But Tonali, I think, is sort of seen as a guy that like can fit into a lot of teams, scrap, battle, and do all that kind of stuff. So in terms of like the fit for the team, I don't think it's like I don't think it's a bad fit. I see the idea of adding the player. I always have this question with Juventus in terms of like, Weston McKennie is their captain, but also maybe not a starter. Like, what's the plan here? This guy, are you going to play him at wingback this season, or is he a midfielder this season, or like, how does that work? I kind of always have that question with Juventus in terms of like, sometimes, or especially around the midfielders, like, what are you hoping to see from these guys and get out of it? How do you want this whole team to sort of function? And with Tonali, like, he is a guy that can do it in a lot of different setups, so then maybe that question's less important. Whereas, I think Coop Miners wants to find space, get on the ball, and be a bit more of that playmaker. And he can maybe do that from deeper, or maybe do that from higher, but he wants to be in that sort of role. Whereas Tonali, I think, is not always asked about having the ball and will be a bit more aggressive and a bit more battle-y. So I can see it, but then again, isn't that what Weston McKennie's for at the same time? So I don't know exactly if that's going to happen.
This is the thing. I look at Juve's like midfielders, and I think I like Locatelli, but I see a bunch of guys who are kind of do a bit of everything type players, and I sort of feel with Tonali, like when Tonali came into Newcastle back in the autumn, like after he was like fully kind of he was slowly moved into the starting lineup, right? And then you got him taking up that 6 role and really covering in transition, and it let Bruno go higher. Like that was great for Newcastle. That was when they had that really amazing period over the end of November, December, January. But I kind of think I've always been a bit of a Tonali doubter, to be honest with you. And it's not that I think he's a bad player at all. I think that Newcastle they kind of perfectly use his strengths and negate his weaknesses. Because I think he's solidly above average at everything except passing forward. Like, that's the thing he doesn't do, which is ironic given that obviously when he was young, I guess it was because of the Brescia to AC Milan thing, but they were like, oh, he's the new Pirlo. And like, he's just not like that at all. He just like runs around and kicks people, and he's pretty good at all that stuff, and he pops up in the box. But I just think that really helps Newcastle because it allows them to be more aggressive and it allows Bruno to get forward. But for another club, I just sort of think he's not going to give you this passing hub, and you can get all the kind of running and battling from other players probably for a lower price than you're going to pay here. I mean, Tonali, I guess, will always have the appeal in Italy because he's Italian and he was once like, the poster child. They were like, he's going to be the next great Italian midfielder.
He's probably the best midfielder for the national team as well.
Sure,
and that is sort of like, if to some extent with Juventus, that's sort of like, you're Italian, are you in the national team? Then you should be at Juventus already.
Yeah, then you belong at Juventus. Yeah, exactly. And like, not having Barella and stuff, I think they've kind of been like, well, this isn't a good look for us. But it just feels like everything that he's good at makes him very valuable to Newcastle and not as valuable to a more conservative defensive team, for example, or like Juve. From Newcastle's point of view, there were rumours about them going for Conor Gallagher earlier in the summer. And if Conor Gallagher is available for less, if you can swap out Tonali for Conor Gallagher and a little bit of money, then that I'm kind of fine with. But otherwise, it just seems like a strange move when this is a settled area of the team where broadly they work pretty well. I think they could do with a bit more creativity, but broadly they work pretty well. And the midfield is basically what makes everything work for Newcastle. So I just don't know why you'd want to upset it in this way. They spent so much money on Tonali. I don't get it.
And they missed out on a decent chunk of time with him actually playing during that period. So,
sure.
I think it sort of, I'd put it more in the category of like, it seems unlikely to happen because he's more valuable to Newcastle than Juventus. Newcastle needs players, and Juventus might not really have the financial ability to push this over the line. And it doesn't really seem like Tonali is like I've got to get back to Italy kind of guy. No. It seems like he's kind of adored in by the Newcastle fans for being what he is. Like I think there is always an awesome premium on these guys that like if Tonali was like actually English, then the perception of him would be different. But because he's essentially like an English style midfielder, but he's Italian and he's been playing in Italy, that makes it like a bit more sort of unique or makes him stand out a bit because he's playing against a different profile or something like that. I always love when those kind of guys kind of pop up. It felt like that a little bit with Spain, with the sort of, Saul and Koke and Gabi for Atleti, that they were like a style of midfielder that was pretty different than the main Spanish national team guys. But like, if you had compared them to, maybe the English national team guys you'd have a similar sort of setup. You'd be like, oh, those guys are kind of like that, actually.
Sure.
So yeah, an interesting one. But yeah, we'll see. Juventus, it's a little bit hard to place. I mean, the Serie A top of the table is very wide open. And I think there's a lot of teams that are sort of vying for that and trying to make moves in the transfer market just to nudge themselves up, because you get a few of these moves right and you're really in contention, I think, this next year in Serie A.
Well, I think, and this is why we're seeing a lot of teams who are trying to free up a bit of money, right? Because the other thing with Juve is this Vlahovic thing, where they've been trying to get rid of him. And now it looks like Šeško will go to United. I guess that Vlahovic won't. But you do sort of look at it, and I'm like, okay, I've read everything Kim's written about Vlahovic, that he's kind of dumb. He's a dummy on the ball. He doesn't make the best decisions. But at the same time, if the price is 25 million euros, which has been the rumor, and the Šeško price is 90 million euros, well, I don't know. It depends on the wages and the contract and all this kind of stuff. But Vlahovic is still 25, and he does get shots, and he does put up expected goals. And even his shot quality the last couple of seasons has been totally fine. He's at like 0.13 non-penalty XG per shot, which is not as bad as I expected. Like, he doesn't do anything else. But Vlahovic is a guy who he's 6'3", he's absolutely enormous. He's gonna be able to compete with defenders anywhere he goes. And at a certain point, when you think, okay, with the prices for the young guy with tools who doesn't do anything yet is 90 mil, then I think versus that, is Vlahovic not kind of undervalued, depending what he's asking in wages? But Šeško's going to ask for crazy wages as well. He's going to be like, you're paying the most insane fee for me. I expect you to pay me wages. I just don't really get it. Like, from United's point of view, I don't know if I'd really do this. But if you said to me, if you framed it as you can have Šeško, or you can have Vlahovic plus 2 midfielders in the 30 to 40 million euro range, then I'd say, oh no, definitely do that.
Yeah. There's also the Ted voice on my shoulder saying, you also don't need to go out and sign that striker. You could just go sign those midfielders. And the Vlahovic one, like, in the same way that we talked about Real Madrid all year with Mbappe, Rodrigo, Vinny, all running into each other, trying to dribble the opponent's right fullback and sort of forming a queue. I can imagine the 25-yard out on the left side of the box with Vlahovic, Bruno, and Cunha all just being God. I want to take the shot from this ridiculous range. Can you move out of my way, please? And so I think in that way, I'm just sort of like, it's going to have to be a different team for Vlahovic, and he's probably going to have to drop his wage demands to get a move and then really try to prove himself in this next bit. If it's, I think he's sort of in that sticky situation there.
But I just look at teams this summer who, like Newcastle might lose their star striker. Villa clearly don't have much room to maneuver. Okay, it looks like they're closing this deal for Gesson, which I think is great. Like, again, wrote in the preview that I think Rodgers needs more of a ball-hungry attacking mid-type to play with, at least right now. But if they were to lose Watkins, it'd be a huge hole in that side, and we have no idea how much money they've got to replace him with. Like, something like a loan for Vlahovic, I think is actually like kind of sick. It depends.
It feels very Monchi, doesn't it? It does feel like something they could be interested in late in the window. We'll see. I think that there will be teams in that sort of range that take a stab at it. I mean, if someone did move for Moise Kean, then I think he'd go back to Fiorentina also. Like, there is also that chain reaction kind of thing that I could see happening pretty easily.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, shall we go on to Inter then? Because Inter are, like you say, turning over the squad. They've been trying to get this deal done for Lookman, but that's obviously stalled. Lookman is angry because he says he kind of had an agreement with the club. Lesson for all footballers: never make a gentleman's agreement with the club. Get everything in writing. But Inter, I think, have been about in the 45 mil range for him, which seems more than fair for a guy who's going to be 28 in October. And he's been fantastic in Italy. There's actually an interesting thing. I don't know if you've been looking at this, but Scouted have been trying to find guys like Salah and trying to find guys who have this combination of making these, what they call game-breaking runs in behind and passes to game-breaking runs in behind. And Lookman is very good for passes to those game-breaking runs and absolutely off the charts for making the run himself. Like, he has been incredible in Italy, and he's apparently making like under 50k a week. Like, to me, this feels like it should just happen. It would benefit everybody. Like, it's a good time for Atalanta to sell him. The price is fine. I don't know. I'm kind of okay with this.
Yeah, I think for those that don't follow Serie A as much, that maybe are more towards like maybe La Liga or the Premier League, that like the drama right now is that Lookman has been told that he could leave the team if a top team came in for him, but that he could not go to a different Italian team in this sort of unwritten gentleman's agreement that he would not hurt the club and play against them and that kind of thing. And he's like, I don't really care where I go. I would like to be paid because I am doing a bit of everything for this team. I am like the main playmaker, even though I'm kind of a winger, kind of a 10. Like, Lookman's stuff has really popped off the charts, and Inter are a team that like kind of need a guy that can do a lot of that carrying and progressing, because like Lautaro Martinez and Thuram, who are their sort of main attackers, are not those kind of guys. And so they need someone that can provide them that outlet out of the back. If they have a bit of dribbling in the midfield, I think that was part of the reason that Mkhitaryan got converted into that midfield role, is because of his sort of ball control and ability to dribble out of tight spaces.
Yeah.
I think that's something that, like, Lookman is a more superlative version. He's athletic. There's a lot to really like about Lookman. He's also just done it in Serie A and helped Atalanta, really rocket up the table and, do some interesting things in Europe. So I think in terms of the fit there, it makes a lot of sense. Atalanta, this is a chance for them to get another peak price. Obviously, they've sold Redigui, their striker, as well. So a chance to collect a lot of money, and it feels like the thing that's holding it back is this sort of gentleman's agreement. And it's unfortunate for Inter because their other options don't necessarily fit the squad as much. One of the other rumored players is Nkunku, who's been sort of kept on ice at Chelsea. Doesn't really fit, I think, the way Maresca wants to play. I think Maresca wants a lot of players that, outside of maybe the center forward, that really want to get on the ball and can play make and can vary their position. And Nkunku's a guy that really doesn't want to get too deep. He wants to be making runs and combining in and around the box to create goals. Like he's a bit more, if we're talking about guys in this role, he's a bit more of like a second striker than he is like sort of a playmaker. And he wants to be involved in the box.
You'd want him doing like the Thuram stuff, like rather than being like this dribbly extra play.
Yes.
Okay, I have strong feelings about this because I was reading a bunch of Chelsea fan blogs, kind of seeing like what's the thinking about a bunch of these peripheral squad players. And I saw, a load of them saying, oh, we're into, if they want Nkunku, going to need to cough up 35 to 40 mil to make this happen. And I was like, if I wanted to get Nkunku now, I'd be like 10 million euros is kind of what I'm expecting to pay. He's paid 15 League 90s in 2 seasons. He's 28 before the end of the year. Like, just get him off the books. And actually, I think I don't know if this is to the credit of them, but Chelsea as a club, I think, are more realistic about this. Like Felix, they paid 52 for. In the end, they'll have brought in about 35 for him, including loan fees. Amugu, they bought for 15. They've sold him basically to themselves. Strasbourg for like slightly less. Like there are a bunch of these guys where the fees they're rumored to be going for are kind of 60 to 90% of what Chelsea paid. And I think they're okay with the idea that, well, we'll sell Madueke for more, and we'll sell Jackson for more, and we'll sell Vega for more, and we'll make small losses on a bunch of these gambles. But Nkunku just doesn't have a big market. And every time we talk about Serie A, I want to talk about this, which is that there are players who fit Serie A that don't fit other leagues. Like maybe some of them fit the Bundesliga. But Inter especially, their whole thing has been like, we can get value. We can get use out of guys who are undervalued elsewhere. Like Thuram, for example. Like Thuram has pretty low shot volume for a striker, isn't the best at hold-up playing congested areas, but he also probably doesn't dribble, defend, create enough for a winger these days. But he's clearly good. And he can do a bit of all this stuff. And that's what makes him interesting for Inter. And I think in the Premier League at the moment, basically all the teams want players to fit neatly. Like they want them to be cleanly in one of these buckets. As like, you are a winger, you're an attacking mid, you're a striker. And it's only teams like Brentford maybe, and maybe to a lesser degree Bournemouth, who are looser on that. And that I think is why we often end up, when we think about a player like Garnacho, who I think has quite strikery type attributes, like he's a shot getter, he puts up big XG, he's not that creative, then you think, oh, well, maybe Brentford would make sense. So, but this was the problem for Havertz in the Premier League, and I think it's the problem for Nkunku too, that like Premier League managers look at them and they're like, I can see that you're good, but like you're not a winger for me, and I don't know if you're a centre forward for me, and are you an attacking mid for me? And actually, we were talking about him before, Morgan Rogers, probably, if he wants to go to the very highest level in the Prem, like he's probably going to need to slightly alter his skill set to fit cleanly into one of these buckets, because right now he's like pretty good at everything, but he doesn't really dribble enough to be a winger, and he doesn't get the ball enough to be an AM, and he doesn't get enough shots to be a striker. And you're like, so what are you? Like, you're really talented, but what are you? And so Nkunku, it makes sense for him to go to Italy. It would be great for him to be in one of these sorts of roles. but only if he's really, really cheap. And if Chelsea are going to ask an arm and a leg for him, then Inter are going to say, but our whole thing is that we get these guys for less because, a Spurs aren't going to come in for Nkunku.
Yeah, and it's not just the Spurs. I think for Chelsea, in their mind, they're looking around town and they're being like, could we get him to Fulham? Could we get him to a Crystal Palace, a team?
Yeah,
that
Palace could feasibly
take
work,
the
I
wage
guess.
Palace is also short of players and has a shape where you could see him sort of slot in underneath a Mateta and again, Mateta and Nkunku as a front three. I would watch that.
Cool.
I would sign up for that. I'm interested. But again, there's the issue of wages. There's also the issue that Nkunku is like a guy that like was the leading goal scorer in the Bundesliga in his last sort of full season as a starter, and that's how he sees himself. And he would rather like have the opportunity to go play in Europe and prove himself again at that level because that's how he views himself. And so I think that's going to be the challenge here is that Chelsea's like, we just want maximum coverage and get what we can if we move this guy. And the player is probably like, I'm good enough to be, again, competing with a Lookman, who is sort of one of the marquee players in Serie A last year. I could actually, Nkunku probably thinks I'm better than this guy. Inter should sign me instead of him and just let me play. And I again, there's some different stylistic things here, but we are talking about a very good player here. So it's a real challenge. And we'll see. I kind of think with the Inter Lookman one is I kind of feel like they'll get to some sort of agreement over deferred payment for next year based on easy to hit targets that will then get that over the line. That if they could get enough money into Bergamo, then Atalanta will do that.
Yeah, I just think that, it'll be like there's a 5 mil fine for moving, within Italy. But Nkunku, I think if Chelsea seriously want to move him, they're going to need to get his fee down to the level that a team like Atalanta could take a risk on him. Right now, he's got all the talent in the world, but he is an awkward fit, and you've got to be realistic about that. And I think now Chelsea have just got to clear the decks as much as possible. And they've been doing a pretty thorough job of it. But getting tied into, oh no, we've got to make the money back, it's not going to happen. You've created the value of the player. So moving on from Inter, are there any teams in Serie A that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, I would, again, I'm not a co-host of a betting podcast, so you might need to get Ted on the hot seat for this one. But I think there's probably a lot of people that are buying AC Milan stock this year. AC Milan are a big team. I think they finished third in XG difference according to FBref this past year. Yeah, a lot of pieces to like. We've kind of documented Leao. They've just gone out and gotten Bashiri in the midfield. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but they've spent money to Yashari. They've strengthened their midfield there to a really significant degree, I think. And so there's a lot to like. I think the feeling at the top is that this is an Inter team that was really old, that has a lot of transition that needs to happen and might not be able to just flip the switch and be one of the top teams immediately next year, or at least that there's enough questions there. I think we've had a lot of questions on Napoli's sort of business. Is Kevin De Bruyne crossing to Luka and Lukaku really going to be the solution? That's really where I look at a chance for an AC Milan, a Roma team that looks like they could be really doing some interesting moves to really kick up. And, we've just sort of detailed that we're not sure exactly where Juventus is going to fall in the mix of this. So some of these teams in Italy outside of the top four look like they could be really, appealing as title contenders or challengers to these European places at the very least.
Yeah, the way you put it, I think, in our group chat was that the top four are not that convincing, but teams 5 to 8 are really exciting. And I think Roma are cool. Like getting in Wesley from Flamengo right back, that's a really cool move. That's been talked about in the newsletter. I think El Ainaoui, the central midfielder from Lens, he's an interesting player. defends in volume, like does some carry, like the decent passer, but like not incredible, but does a bit of everything, gets fouled a lot as well. That's quite interesting. But up front, they've obviously taken this risk on Evan Ferguson, which is kind of cool. Who's still, is he even 21 yet? I think he might still be 20. Yeah, he's still 20, which is bananas. It feels like he's lived like 2 careers in football already. But the other one that I like is that for the other striker role, they've been linked to Mikautadze from Lyon. They've also been linked to Fabio Silva and apparently are competing with Dortmund. And apparently Dortmund want him, which makes no sense at all to me. I don't get the Fabio Silva thing. I didn't play that much for Rangers, Anderlecht, PSV.
I think there's like, I'm trying to think of like there's really obvious reasons to like Fabio Silva. He is big and tall and fast, right? Like you look at the athletic profile, and it's the reason that teams were really looking at him as a teenager, going like, this guy again could if he fleshes out the rest of his game, the physical profiles and the tools are really there. So I think you see those pieces and see a guy that will press and battle and do some of that. And you can imagine, Gasparini maybe being like, maybe this could kind of work for my team. I could maybe do with a guy like that. Mikautadze, very different looking guy. So that is one where you sort of go like, well, this could really pick the direction of the team. Obviously, I think the big question for Roma to some extent is like, how are they going to shape their playmakers behind the front? It feels like they're probably set up to play, not too far a variation of like this 3-4-2-1 kind of shape, maybe 3-5-2. Feels like they're kind of going in that direction. So how are they going to sort of shape the playmakers? Is Dybala going to be a big part of this or not? Like at this sort of stage in his career, I think that's a really interesting question. But yeah, I think deciding that Mikautadze is a guy who came and played at Ajax and really didn't fit the Ajax team, an Ajax team that had a lot of possession and was able to sit on top of opponents. I think Mikautadze had been really successful at Metz in his, he sort of had a fake second stint, but in his first stint, he was really successful as a player that would stretch the game in transition and would open himself up well. I think fans maybe have seen him do that for Georgia, where they've played sort of with like a front two, and he's not just like a pin the center back, center forward. He's a guy that moves around, that makes these runs when the space looks like it's opening up on the break. He'll really go for it and do that kind of thing, and has a little bit of that technical skill to get himself and navigate those situations, which is a different setup than Fabio Silva, who's a bit more maybe battering ram style. So some real questions there. And again, for me, that comes down a little bit to how they want to do the playmaking behind that, what fit the striker will then look like.
Yeah, because we talked before about Lorenzo Pellegrini, who was like, at one stage looked like he was going to be one of the best attacking midfielders around and kind of stalled out and now is running down his deal. I really like Mikautadze, and I think it's weird that we don't hear more about him because I guess it was limited minutes last season. It was kind of 1,500 minutes, but he's a huge green bar superstar, and on a team which was not a dominant team. They were 6th in the end, but he had 14 non-penalty goal involvements in 1,500 minutes in the league and another 7 in under 700 mins in the Europa League. He's at like 0.7 expected goals and assists per 90. He's big. Like shot volume is good given that he does do a lot of that winger-y stuff. And he's not even 25 yet. I just think that kind of player feels like a real Gasparini player. And it does feel like it gives you a bit more. If I had Fabio Silva and Ferguson, I would be a bit worried. As in I was like, there's a chance that neither one of these guys is good. Whereas with Mikautadze, I think I'm going to get some shots out of him. I'm going to get some production out of him. And he can kind of do that wide striker thing that Højlund did for Gasparini before at Atalanta. That's pretty cool. But it might take a little while there to spool up. But having a guy who could play with Ferguson or instead of him is interesting. You're right. That space between the central midfield and the attack is more intriguing. You wonder if Gasparini is going to have to end up creating with sort of weight of numbers rather than like sheer passing quality, but he must be looking for a playmaker of some kind, even if it's an unconventional one like Lookman.
Yeah, absolutely. I think uh, the way he's looking at the team a little bit, or the way Roma have approached it, is again, they've looked and gone like, we Gasparini probably wants a playmaker here, but there are other things that we can improve the quality of the squad on a lot more if we spend money on right now. And
Sure.
that playmaker one might have to be like a year two thing.
Hmm.
It kind of feels like that's the direction it's going to go. They're going to try these guys out. They're going to get a shot. And with Gasparini, like there's probably not many other coaches where you feel like a new solution could really just like materialize, like that there's more going on the training ground to bring a new guy into the fold that we like wouldn't expect. Feels like
Hmm.
Gasparini is a little bit of that guy that like something's going to happen on the training ground, it's going to click, and that's like what they're going to roll out for 15 games in a row in October or November or something like that. Like that's going to be the click that really starts whatever the Gasparini Roma project looks like. So
Yeah.
yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on it because Serie A is tight. I think it's uh, of all these leagues, we expect Bayern to still be really strong. We expect PSG to still be really strong. Like looking at the preview content that Transfer Flow put out, the top teams, there's not a ton of movement there, right? La
Hmm.
Liga, we previewed this previously. We think the top three teams are going to be the top three teams. Serie A, there could be a lot of shakeup. That there are the teams that are sort of outside of it. We haven't really touched on also like Sarri coming back to Lazio. It feels like
Hmm.
there's sort of that is a move that guarantees at least a pretty high floor for the team. Maybe not totally sure on what the ceiling of that project looks like immediately, but um, it feels like there's a lot of contenders right now in Serie A that are, with more limited budgets in the Premier League, trying to
Hmm.
take little gambles here and there to just get themselves ahead of one or two of these other teams around them.
Yeah, there isn't a team really that currently marries like elite talent with a really great manager. You know, like Conte has got a weirdly shaped squad. Allegri's back at Milan, and like that maybe that's what makes them an interesting
The
prospect. That they
closest, at least, to that, maybe.
Yeah. Whereas a bunch of the others, you're like, oh, I like this coach. Oh, I don't like this squad. Or I think the squad's kind of interesting, but Inter, Juve, they've got coaches who do not really like set the world on fire. Also, could be an interesting season for Como because Como continue to double down on their strategy of signing up these young prospects who have like big, interesting numbers. Jesus Rodriguez, they brought in Baturina as well. Like a bunch of guys, but they just know exactly how they want to recruit. They're keeping Paz for another year. They'll keep Jao for another year. Like there's a
The
real case for them.
the Como project feels like it's going in a good direction. And as we talk
Mm-hmm.
about all these sort of more traditional top sides in Italy duking it out, I think the really switched on people following Italian football are watching that Como team going like, how high could this team actually finish this year? Like
Yeah.
the feeling is like I would say is probably quite high, and really it's like you're almost talking yourself down to something more reasonable for a team that historically has not been at those heights, right? Like you're
Yeah.
really trying to be like, you're like, well, could they then finish ahead of the team in eighth? And you're like, yeah, I could. Again, we're looking at those top eight. Like Fiorentina was in that mix, right until the end, and they're in that
Yeah.
top group. I think there's a lot of optimism around Como to say like, yeah, they could do that same kind of thing or even go past that. It's timeline with Como. The more time they keep making these good choices bit by bit, it feels like the momentum is there. They're a good team to watch for people that haven't spent a lot of time watching them. I think
Mm-hmm.
they're one to keep an eye on. Cesc Fabregas is still in the building. There's a lot to be excited about there. And again, that's after we've already said the top 6 to 8 is very competitive and wide open. So like we're looking at a league that has a lot of parity and competition this coming year. It should be a good one. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Me too, man. And we'll have to keep covering it over the course of the summer. There's always going to
Yeah.
be more action in Serie A. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening today or watching us. Please do make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel if you are watching us on video. Hayden, thank you so much for being here and going through all these teams and transfers with me. People can find you at H Van Brewer. That's right, on social media.
Yep.
Perfect. We will catch a bunch of you next time. If you haven't signed up for the preview, please make sure that you do. But we're getting close to the start of the season now, so get excited. We'll see you on Monday. Bye-bye.